Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meets U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House. Why their meeting could have a major impact on efforts to find a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu arrived in Washington this week, hoping to re-establish better relations with the White House after his fractious relationship with former U.S. President Barack Obama over the last 8 years. Netanyahu and his wife were warmly received by U.S. President Trump and First Lady Melania, and in the first meeting between Netanyahu and Trump since his election, the American leader signaled a change of direction on U.S. policy in the Middle East. Trump dropped the long-standing U.S. insistence on a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
I thought for a while the two-state looked like it may be the easier of the two. But honestly, if Bibi and if the Palestinians, if Israel and the Palestinians are happy, I'm happy with the one they like the best.
The Israeli Prime Minister also did not commit to a two-state solution and said he wanted to focus more on substance rather than labels. Netanyahu stressed he has two prerequisites for peace.
First, the Palestinians must recognize the Jewish state. They have to stop calling for Israel's destruction. They have to stop educating their people for Israel's destruction. Second, in any peace agreement, Israel must retain the overriding security control over the entire area west of the Jordan River.
Meanwhile, Palestinians have reacted strongly to the policy shift by the White House, which they say may undermine Palestinian efforts to have their own state. Hanan Ashrawi, a senior member of the Palestine Liberation Organization, said, quote, "If the Trump administration rejects this policy, it would be destroying the chances for peace and undermining American interests, standing and credibility abroad." Both the Israeli and U.S. leaders also addressed other contentious issues like Israeli settlements and the Iran nuclear deal. For perspective on all of this, joining me now from Boston is Chuck Freilich. He is a former Deputy National Security Advisor in Israel, and he served as a senior analyst at the Israeli Ministry of Defense. Here with me in the studio is Hussein Ibish. He is a senior resident scholar at the Arab Gulf States Institute. Welcome to both of you to the show. Chuck, let me start with you. We appear to have something of a major change here on the part of the United States. The United States now saying that it will accept a one-state solution, possibly two-state, possibly one-state, but that's a major change because in past decades, the U.S. position has always been a two-state solution. What is Israel's position on a two-state solution?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that the president was really indicating a change in American policy. I would take that sentence in the totality of his statements in the last week or so, and in the totality of his behavior regarding foreign affairs since coming into office. In his other statements, he was speaking of a two-state solution. And I think the ostensible change in what he said during the press conference was, it was a press conference and he was trying to create a positive atmosphere. Certainly, Israel does not want to see a one-state solution. The Prime Minister, he didn't say the words in the press conferences because he's also playing to his home, to a home constituency and mostly to his coalition partners, the right-wing partners. But Israel doesn't want to see a one-state solution. And there's a fundamental misunderstanding, as if the obstacle to a two-state solution is the settlements, and if we could just resolve the settlements issue, there would be a peace agreement. Now, I'm not saying that the settlements issue isn't a problem, it most certainly is, and I think it's a misguided policy. But Israel has agreed, has offered to withdraw from virtually 100% of the West Bank and 100% of Gaza on a number of occasions, and the Palestinians say no. And it was in a Palestinian state on almost 100% of the territory, a division of Jerusalem, just about everything the Palestinians could possibly want, and they said no. So that the real issue here isn't the settlements, they're a problem and it has to be addressed. It's that the Palestinians seem to be incapable of saying yes to anything.
Hussein, what is your view? Was President Trump backing away from a two-state solution?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I would agree with Chuck on is his characterization of where this should be, how this should be seen in the context of U.S. policy. I think that's right. I think it was presidential musing. Now, it certainly has policy implications. It opens the door for the United States to move away from its commitment to two states towards something else. One state doesn't mean anything. I mean, Prime Minister Netanyahu noted that two states means a lot of things to a lot of people. That's true. But one state means a vastly greater number of things to an even smaller group of people. So even within a smaller group, you have a bigger range. So it doesn't really mean anything. And I do think U.S. policy is still oriented towards two states. But you do have the opening of a space to move away from that commitment, which is driven by, let's be clear about this, it's driven by a desire to accommodate the Israeli right, which is annexationist and predatory and bent on building and expanding these illegal settlements. Now, I agree with Chuck that they are not the only issue, and that if you resolve settlements, you haven't arrived at a peace agreement. He's dead wrong on his history about 100%. Virtually 100% is not 100%. And there was nothing ever offered to the Palestinians that can be documented with any clarity and any specificity.
Excuse me, sir. Camp David, the Clinton parameters, and the Olmert proposals were all almost 100%.
That's only if you take East Jerusalem and all of Israel's definition of occupied East Jerusalem out, and then you're still talking about something like 93% or 94% at most, which may be non-contiguous, and there's no document demonstrating any of these alleged offers. Even the Americans at Camp David, Aaron Miller, Dennis Ross, and Rob Malley, don't agree on what they think Israel offered the Palestinians, let alone the Israelis and the Palestinians. Ditto with the negotiations between Abbas and Olmert, where the Palestinians were not allowed to take the maps they were shown, or even to make copies of them, or make notes on the copies. So none of this is documented, and that's for a good reason, which is that while certainly the Israelis made serious proposals, and Palestinians have made serious proposals to Israel, neither side has said yes to a final agreement proposed by either, because in fact there hasn't been an agreement because there hasn't been an agreement. It's not because either side has had a monopoly on making serious offers, both have, and it's not that neither side has had a monopoly on saying no. Both have said no constantly, really, I think just saying there's one side that won't say yes is just ridiculous.
Okay, let me give Chuck a chance to respond to that. Go ahead, Chuck.
Okay, look, I don't want to get into a historic argument here. Yeah. The Israeli offers are very, very well documented by the American participants there,
but they don't
including
agree.
Dennis Ross, Aaron Miller, and Martin Indyk, as well as President Clinton himself, and by Secretary Rice regarding the Olmert proposal. There is no doubt about these proposals.
But they give different accounts, obviously there's a doubt.
Okay. Chuck, I want to get to something else, and that is,
let me accept, which I do not, but let me, for argument's purposes, let me accept Hussein's argument that it was only 94%. I would make the case that if somebody offers you 94% of what you want in life, the smart thing to do is grab it and run before they change their mind.
Yeah, if it were just territory, I think they would have. Yeah, I mean, but there are other issues other than territory.
Well, it wasn't just territory.
Yeah.
All right.
But you rightly point out settlements are not the only issue.
It was also
Go ahead.
All right, Chuck.
I agree that it's not the only issue.
Yeah.
There were disagreement on a variety of other issues.
That's right.
And I'm not trying to put 100% of the blame on the Palestinian side.
Good.
Clearly, the Israeli settlement policy is a problem as well.
The settlements are a contentious issue. Israel recently approved an expansion program in the West Bank, but we saw during that news conference with Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, the U.S. president saying that he'd like Israel to hold back, those were his words, hold back on settlement construction. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
As far as settlements, I'd like to see you hold back on settlements for a little bit. We'll work something out, but I would like to see a deal be made. I think a deal will be made.
We also had the Palestinian leader, Mahmoud Abbas, say that the Israeli Prime Minister must, quote, respond to the request of U.S. President Donald Trump and the international community to halt all settlement activities. Chuck, is Israel going to respect Trump's wishes here?
I think mostly, or maybe to use the president's terminology, bigly, but not entirely. Remember, the prime minister here has like in all democratic states, he has a constituency that he has to play to, and in this case, even pander to. I think he will exercise restraint. He probably won't do everything that has been publicly announced, but he'll have to do something for political cover. I would also take into account there have been, over the years, there are endless announcements about settlement activity, and some of them do take place, but usually there's a lot more talk than the reality.
That's true.
So some of it will happen, probably not all of it.
Chuck, what happens with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? On the one hand, as you point out, he's talking to two audiences here. The international audience, he says, yes, we do accept a two-state solution. To his domestic audience, especially to his support base, he's saying, no, it's a one-state solution. Ultimately, doesn't he owe his allegiance to his domestic base? I mean, that's where his power comes from.
He hasn't said that. He has not said one state to his own base at all.
No,
the only thing that you can say is that lately he hasn't been using the word two states because even that actually he's mentioned, but because it's contentious, he has a coalition which could come apart over the terminology, so he's avoided using it. Look, no one in Israel, even those who ostensibly speak of a one-state solution, they're talking a different one-state solution. They're not talking the kind that you and I are talking about at the moment, where it's one united country and where Israel loses its Jewish majority instantaneously. They're talking various solutions which in effect leave the Palestinians with autonomy, not with independence, and it's not a unified one state. No one in Israel wants to see that.
Right.
Isn't that what the Palestinians have right now?
Well, if you look at what Minister Bennett, the head of the Jewish Home Party, is advocating, to a certain extent, there's a variation on it, but to a certain extent, yes, you're right. That is the situation today, and that's why I think his proposal is an untenable one. It doesn't take us anywhere. And in the end, I think most people in Israel, including the Prime Minister, recognize that the only solution is a two-state solution.
Right. Hussein, as far as the Palestinians are concerned, there's two constituencies there as well.
At least.
You have Gaza and you have the West Bank.
Well, Hamas and Fatah.
Hamas and Fatah. What's the bottom line for the Palestinians? What's acceptable?
Well, I mean, I do think the split among Palestinians is a fairly crippling one, but I also think that serious observers understand that Hamas has thrived. It became a real national rival to the PLO and to Fatah precisely because the negotiating process was perceived to have collapsed. Oslo was perceived to be frozen in time circa 1996, and it hasn't really budged since then. And, I think that it's generally conceded by serious observers that Hamas wouldn't survive a successful negotiation between Israel and the PLO, that it would, A, find its ability to command support greatly restricted, and B, would probably split, and not just into two, but maybe even three factions. As long as there isn't major movement, Hamas is a major threat, and that is an impediment and something to be overcome. But I think the solution is the same. The solution for overcoming Hamas is the same as the solution for overcoming the conflict, which is serious movement towards peace. I think it solves both problems simultaneously. They are symbiotic problems.
Okay, Hussein, I want to talk about one other issue which you've heard about in recent weeks, and that is the possibility of moving the United States Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Right.
Do you think that's going to happen? How will the Palestinians respond?
Well, they would have responded very negatively politically, and I think on the ground it would have been very difficult, if not impossible, for the leadership to prevent some kind of spontaneous or organized, potentially by Hamas or others, violent response or at least a kinetic response of protests and stuff that would probably turn violent, because I think the Israeli forces haven't got many options in dealing with mass movements other than ultimately violence, and those mass movements tend to be violent too. So I think that it's not, but I think it's not going to happen because I think it's such a symbolic gesture without any real practical benefits to either the United States or Israel. I think it's the kind of idea that gets driven not by Israelis, but by Jewish American hardliners like Mr. Friedman, the nominee to be ambassador to Israel, and others. It sounded really good on the campaign trail, as it did to others like Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. And once you get into the White House, you start to realize what a silly idea it is and how much harm it can do. And I would say it's especially not in Israel's interest vis-a-vis the Gulf states.
Talking about the Gulf states, Chuck, there is one other strategy being talked about. It's the so-called outside-in strategy. Getting the support of Arab states, especially those Arab states that have common cause with Israel against Iran, to get some kind of resolution to this conflict, formulate some kind of agreement. Will that fly?
We are in a new era. The fact that there is a convergence of interests between Israel, not just the Gulf states, but many of the Sunni states, it includes Egypt and Jordan as well. There's a convergence of strategic interests that we've never seen in the past. First and foremost on Iran, as you were saying, but it's not just that. It's ISIS, it's Hamas, it's the Muslim Brotherhood, it's regional instability. There are a whole variety of things.
That's right.
I'm a little bit skeptical about how far the convergence goes into practical cooperation. I'm even more skeptical, I'm quite dubious, whether it helps us significantly with the peace process. I don't think that's the problem. The Palestinians, both sides, both sides have to make some fundamental decisions here. And no one else can make it for them. Now, I agree with Hussein that the absence of progress on the peace process was one of the reasons that Hamas was established and that it took hold. But the other one was that it was a rejection of the corruption and the incompetence of the Palestinian Authority.
True.
That hasn't changed. That won't disappear even if there is a peace agreement. And the fact that there is a division today between the West Bank and Gaza, between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, is also one of the fundamental obstacles to a peace agreement. Because even if both the PA and Israel were willing to make all of the concessions necessary, the PA does not speak for the Palestinian people today and could not sign a final peace agreement.
Well, the PLO does, and even Hamas recognizes that only the PLO can speak for the Palestinians. They criticize the current makeup of the PLO. They want to take it over, but they do bow.
Will this outside-in strategy be seen as something that's being imposed on the Palestinian people?
If it really played out the way its simplistic formula is sort of laid out, it would probably feel that way, and that might be a real problem making it work. But I actually agree with Chuck. I think that it inverts the relationship. I think that solving, not necessarily resolving, having progress between Israel and the Palestinians would facilitate greater cooperation between Israel and particularly the Gulf states. I mean, you've got peace treaties with Israel and Jordan, but you need something to facilitate, to grease the wheels with the Arab states and with the Gulf states. Progress on the Palestinian front is probably politically necessary for them in terms of their domestic politics. So I think it's reversed. I think that progress on the Israeli-Palestinian thing helps Israel and the Gulf states and the others come together for all the reasons Chuck said. He's absolutely right. There's a strategic convergence on a multiplicity of issues, and one stumbling block, which is the lack of progress between Israel and the Palestinians. I agree with him, faults on both sides, but if we could get progress,
what about the point
that would help a lot.
Hussein, about whom do the Israelis negotiate with? You have the Palestinians.
Well, there's no question. No, there's no dispute about this. It's the PLO. The PLO is the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people diplomatically.